One of the most awe-inspiring moments from the 1000-Year Blood War arc anime takes place at the beginning of episode 7. We are treated to an anime-exclusive scene which reveals to us the original war between the Quincy and the Shinigami that occurred over 1,000 years ago. Yhwach's Empire of Light army had fought against the original Gotei 13. This group was headed up by Yamamoto, who was in his prime. We watch this bloodthirsty group massacre the army of the Quincy by the thousands, and it culminates in Yamamoto himself, who is clad in his bankai, walking over a smouldering mountain of Quincy corpses as he crushes their skulls while walking forward. Chojuro Sasakibe, his right-hand man, stabs Yhwach from behind, and with a mighty yell, Yamamoto brings down his Zanpakuto and completely sets Yhwach on fire, reducing him down to nothing but smouldering ash. So it seemed as though the original Gotei 13 had won. But here's the thing that people miss when they analyze this flashback. Yhwach was literally traumatized by the original Gotei 13. It's hard to even imagine him in this state because of his near omnipotent power that we witnessed during the 1000-Year Blood War arc, especially after he activates the Almighty and absorbs the Soul King himself. But in this video, we'll be dissecting exactly why Yhwach genuinely feared Yamamoto's original generation of the Gotei 13. We'll go beyond the surface level to explore how the brutality of this very first generation had fundamentally shaped Yhwach into the tyrant that we see within the present timeline. The organization of the Gotei 13, the way that we know it, didn't exist over 1,000 years ago. Yhwach himself describes the original Gotei 13 as defenders in name only, as they were comprised of nothing less than a brutal mob of the most dangerous killers in the Seireitei. This isn't Yhwach being dramatic or exaggerating for effect. It's him acknowledging a fundamental truth about his enemy that made them so terrifying. In chapter 523, Shunsui refers to the original version of the Gotei 13 as the strongest version in its entire history, and he doesn't mean strongest in terms of raw spiritual pressure or impressive bankai releases. He is talking about them being the strongest because these captains had absolutely zero moral limitations holding them back. The original Gotei 13 were not sourced from the Shinigami Academy, as it didn't even exist at the time. Yamamoto instead personally headhunted each individual to become a captain based on specific criteria, the number one of which was to have an infamous reputation within the Soul Society. These weren't noble warriors who answered a call of duty. They were in fact criminals, mercenaries, and killers who Yamamoto assembled because they were the most dangerous souls walking the Seireitei. Take Unohana for example. We know her throughout most of Bleach as the gentle captain of the 4th Division, the healer who refuses to raise her blade in combat. But during the era of the original Gotei 13, Shunsui describes her as the most infamous criminal within the history of the Soul Society. She had given herself the name Yachiru, meaning the master of 8,000 styles. Unohana's desire was to find someone strong enough to satisfy her bloodlust, and she left mountains of corpses in that search. Yamamoto recruited her specifically because of this reputation, and you can assume that every other captain within that original lineup carried similar notoriety. To appreciate why Yhwach feared the original Gotei 13, you have to understand who Yamamoto was back then, because the head captain that we see in the 1000-Year Blood War arc is a fundamentally different person than the one who had led the first generation. Yhwach himself calls Yamamoto a demon with a sword, who would use anything and everything to win. He describes a commander who considered the lives of everyone around him to weigh as much as ashes. When his subordinates used to die back then, it did not affect him. As far as he was concerned, they were expendable in his pursuit for victory. A big thing people forget about is that he hadn't founded the Shinigami Academy yet. He hadn't taken on students like Shunsui and Ukitake and formed those father-son bonds. This is a Yamamoto operating purely on violence and pragmatism, holding together a band of unruly criminals through nothing but the fact that he was the strongest amongst them. You could say that he had nothing to lose. In the anime, when young Shunsui sneaks into Yamamoto's private quarters, he finds a painting depicting a monster that is engulfed in flames. Yamamoto tells him that this monster appeared in the Soul Society a long time ago, and it made the problems that they were facing much worse. He promises that this monster will never reappear again, and that he probably won't survive if it does. If you read between the lines, he is talking about himself here. He's referring to what he was 1,000 years ago when he wielded Zanka no Tachi Itachi without hesitation, no mercy, without any concern for collateral damage or the lives of those around him. Yamamoto underwent significant change to the point that he adopted the name Genryusai out of respect for his loyal lieutenant. It's hard to imagine the demon who defeated Yhwach and the Quincy all those years ago would end up becoming this soft. The Shinigami exist to maintain the balance between the realms. The world of the living, the Soul Society, and Hueco Mundo are connected through the cycle of souls. When a hollow is purified by a Zanpakuto, the soul is cleansed and sent to the Soul Society, thus maintaining the equilibrium. This balance is literally what prevents the collapse of reality itself. The Quincy, on the other hand, have a totally opposite approach. When they destroy hollows, they don't purify them, they annihilate them completely, thus destroying the soul that the hollow evolved from. Do this a few thousand times and you've caused a major imbalance to the cycle of souls, and the Quincy honestly were very efficient at eliminating hollows. And not to mention that Yhwach's Quincy were a branch that had deviated from the traditional Quincy, and they were in fact targeting Quincy territories, trying to recruit more members into their army, and they were taking over territories within the world of the living and the Soul Society. It got to a point where Yhwach had set his sights on the Seireitei, and this is where he was met with the band of killers that Yamamoto had set loose onto the Quincy. The original Gotei 13 were not in a position to negotiate with the Empire of Light. They were strictly going to exterminate the problem, so yeah, they had every reason to go after the Quincy. Not only were they disrupting the cycle of souls, but Yhwach's branch was actively trying to conquer over every territory within all three realms. Just look at Bazbi and Hashwal's backstory, what on earth they did to their own people. As brutal as the original Gotei 13 are, it's hard to say that Yhwach's Empire of Light didn't deserve what happened to them. The anime exclusive scenes in episode 7 don't hold back in showing us exactly what happened 1,000 years ago. The Seireitei is heavily damaged and burning in several areas as Yhwach leads his army towards Yamamoto and the original captains. We then see them spring into action as they systematically destroy the assembled Quincy with their respective Zanpakuto. It needs to be emphasized here that the original Gotei 13 didn't have designated roles yet. The 4th Division wasn't a healing squad, the 12th Division wasn't a research department. Every single one of these captains existed just for one purpose, and that was killing. So you could say that they were all just behaving like Squad 11. We see Chika Shihoin, the first captain of the 2nd Division and the ancestor of Yoruichi, as he decapitates a Quincy with a single powerful kick. Chigiri Shijima, the first captain of the 4th Division, beheads multiple soldiers with just a sealed Zanpakuto. Entetsu Kumoi crushing enemy soldiers with a Kanabo. Every captain is shown cutting down, dismembering, and annihilating Yhwach's Quincy forces without hesitation or any mercy. We cut to Yamamoto then, clad in his Bankai, walking over a mountain of dying and dead Quincy. Their bodies are literally smoldering beneath his feet. What happened to the Empire of Light was pretty embarrassing, as you could hardly call this a fight, it was more of a culling. When Yhwach confronts Yamamoto, he does more than just remember the original Gotei 13 as the force that had defeated them. During the 1,000-year Blood War arc, Yhwach speaks about how he respected the original Gotei 13. And this level of respect gives us some crucial information about his psychology going into the Quincy invasion. When Yhwach stands over Yamamoto's body that is being cut in half, he calls him weak, but he immediately clarifies that he wasn't always this way. The original captains were a group of bloodthirsty killers that Yhwach himself respected. They were killers and Yhwach understood killers. He could operate on their level. What the Quincy King cannot respect and what he derides is what the Gotei 13 became during those 1,000 years of peace. He looks down on the current iteration of the Gotei 13, stating how the Shinigami now have people and things to love and protect. He views their current sense of justice and morals as a weakness, and it makes them hesitate when action is required. The Quincy King declares that the Gotei 13 died with the Quincy 1,000 years ago. Even if the Soul Society is only being destroyed now physically, in his mind, the organization that he truly feared ceased to exist the moment that they found something to treasure. The brutal irony of all of this is that all of those atrocities that were committed by the original Gotei 13 during the Quincy extermination, that lack of mercy, the treatment of an entire race as vermin to be eradicated, well, Yhwach had learned from that. These horrible acts committed by the Seireitei during their invasion of the Soul Society were in many ways a mirror of what the Quincy experienced 1,000 years ago. So the original Gotei 13 did more than just defeat Yhwach and his army. They left behind a shadow of themselves that would return in the form of Yhwach's invisible empire, which would attack the Soul Society 1,000 years later. This brings us to the main reason as to why Yhwach feared the original Gotei 13 and why he believed the modern version had become weak. It all comes down to the difference between killers and heroes. The original Gotei 13 were killers. They really had no code of honor that was binding their actions. They had no subordinates whose lives that they valued. Because of having no morals, they didn't lack hesitation. When a threat emerged, they eliminated it with maximum prejudice and they moved on to the next problem. The modern Gotei 13 by contrast have become heroes in a way. They had students and subordinates they trained and protected. This new Gotei 13 has developed institutional morality, and because of all of these changes during an era of peace, it led to them hesitating. Yhwach exploits this relentlessly during the Quincy invasion. He notes that Yamamoto didn't have his missing arm restored by Orihime, attributing this to Yamamoto not wanting aid from humans. This pride or concern for appearances would have been utterly foreign to the demon who walked over burning Quincy corpses 1,000 years ago. The Yamamoto of 1,000 years ago would have done whatever it took to defeat the enemy, whether if that meant exploiting a human like Orihime to have his arm healed. The Yamamoto of the present tried to carry the burden of 2 worlds on his shoulders alone, and because of that he failed. I say all of this like it's a bad thing. It's good that the Gotei 13 mellowed out over time. It gave Yamamoto the opportunity to build the Shinigami Academy. Here he was able to train students, he formed bonds with Shunsui and Ukitake and so many other Shinigami, and in a sense he developed this paternal nature. He became the pillar who maintained the Seireitei and the Soul Society's order through wisdom and authority rather than just overwhelming violence. So yeah, to Yhwach this transformation was weakness, but to us it was growth. Without this mellowing out, the Soul Society would not have flourished over the 1,000 years since Yhwach's defeat. It was because of that era of peace that the Soul Society was able to produce Ichigo's allies and the captains who would all stand against Aizen and the Vandenreich. But with all of that good came with some glaring blind spots. The modern Gotei 13 at the beginning of the 1,000-year Blood War arc couldn't conceive of an enemy as ruthless as they once were, because they had forgotten what they themselves had been capable of. Yhwach hadn't forgotten. He had 1,000 years to remember every Quincy corpse, every act of extermination, because his entire army was nearly annihilated by a group that he respected. So yeah, this is my explanation as to why Yhwach feared the original Gotei 13. I want to now hand over the discussion to all of you. What do you think about the first generation of the Gotei 13? Do you believe Yhwach was right that they became weaker, or do you think that their transformation was necessary for the long-term survival of the Soul Society? Do continue the discussion in the comments, and lastly, thank you for making it to the end of this one, and I look forward to seeing you in my next video.
A massive thank you goes out to all of my amazing Patreon supporters for helping to make this video possible. If you also want to support the channel and see your name in the end of my videos, then check out my Patreon, which has loads of perks like early video access and so much more. Thank you for sticking around till the end of the video, and whatever you contribute will mean a lot to me.